You noted that Western civilization was built upon Judaism or Judeo-Christian values, but would you concede that other civilizations, such as the Islamic civilization, especially during its golden age, and Chinese civilization and Indian civilization, which were very economically successful as late as the 17th and 18th century, would you concede that their failure ultimately stems from Western imperialism and the exploitation of these regions, which were successful prior to the West conquering and then exploiting them for their raw materials?
No. So, no, historically, I would not concede that. So, the Islamic world didn't fail because the West was involved with the Islamic world. The Islamic world failed because it fell into fundamentalism. Between 800 and 1400, as you note, the Islamic world was responsible for the preservation of a lot of the Greek literature that I'm very fond of. It was intellectually thriving. There was economic growth. It was an attempt to balance fundamental principles and reason. And then Islam fell into a form of fundamentalism that tried to rule out reason in favor of theocracy, and that has continued, unfortunately, until today. As far as the failure of economic growth in places like China, China was successful as a mercantilist state in the same way that some Western countries were successful as mercantilist states. But what has made the world different is not mercantilist states. What has made the world different is a fundamental recognition of the alienability of individual human labor, and that is what has allowed the West to grow beyond China. So China is still a very powerful country, economically speaking, but it has not embraced the principle of individual human liberty still, and that's a serious problem. So I don't think that imperialism can really explain the failures of other civilizations to grow beyond a certain point or stagnation at a certain point. I think that's putting a little bit too much, historically speaking, not enough on the civilizations themselves, and too much on military conquest how long did the military conquest of China last? China was in control of its own fate before and after. So the conquest of China, including of Hong Kong, lasted, approximately 100 years? 130 years?
Mainland China, roughly up until 1949, when the Maoists took over Hong Kong
right.
Until 1997.
And by the way, Hong Kong was the most successful economic area of China. Right, which is so if we're talking about economic stagnation, Hong Kong's actually a terrible example. It's a great example of how adopting Western values in cultures that were not originally Western has led to massive economic growth. It's also true of free markets in Singapore and in South Korea and in every other place that has adopted Western values with regard to free markets and property ownership. So the conquest of those areas may be unjustifiable on an imperialist level, but from an economic growth standpoint, it was very good for Hong Kong that Hong Kong was conquered by the West, just in pure GDP growth terms. As far as the conquest of China, you're right. From the Opium Wars, which began, the 1850s, until about 1949, so about a 100-year gap right there. That is not what leads China to be a laggard in terms of economic growth. It certainly is not what leads China to be a laggard in terms of human freedom. There was a great lack of human freedom in China, far beyond the West, in leading up to Western imperialism and then following Western imperialism. So the question is, the expansion of Western values, are those good for countries or bad for countries? That's not a justification of imperialism, which can in fact lead to the subjugation of peoples, obviously. But I'm loath to blame every problem in every part of the developing world on Western imperialism when I don't think the record quite bears that out. Is that fair?